MSI's Delta 15 is the first gaming laptop to feature AMD's new Radeon RX 6700M graphics. So let's test it out in 13 different games and compare it against other laptops and see how it stacks up. My Delta 15 has an 8-core Ryzen 7 5800H processor with Radeon RX 6700M graphics. There's 16 gigs of memory and a 15.6-inch 1080p 240Hz screen. The 6700M is AMD's middle option out of their new RDNA 2 mobile graphics, sitting in between the 6600M and 6800M with 10 gigs of VRAM, and AMD says it competes with Nvidia's RTX 3070. Now, the AMD spec sheet for the 6700M notes that it can run up to 135 watts. In a GPU-only stress test, I found that my Delta 15 would run the GPU up to 120 watts, and then with the CPU also under load, this lowered to about 95 watts. The MSI Center software can be used to change performance modes. All testing was done here with the highest extreme performance mode set. Unfortunately, the Delta 15 does not have a mux switch, so it's not possible to disable the integrated graphics. But both the right-hand Type-C port and HDMI port connect directly to the 6700M, so connecting an external screen should bypass this, and I'll test this too. The MSI Center software has overdrive enabled by default, which affects screen response time. With this enabled, we're looking at about a 5 millisecond average gray-to-gray response time for the Delta 15's 240Hz panel, so a little slower than the 4.16 milliseconds needed for all transitions to occur within the refresh window. The Delta 15 was about average in terms of total system latency, which is the amount of time measured between a mouse click and a gunshot fired in CSGO. The Delta 15 is also available with a 144Hz panel though, so expect different results with that option. Now, the memory that came in my Delta 15 was the faster X8 stuff rather than X16, so I haven't changed it. Alright, so with all that in mind, let's find out how well MSI's Delta 15 and AMD's Radeon RX 6700M perform in games and compare against other laptops. Cyberpunk 2077 was tested the same on all laptops, and I've got MSI's Delta 15 with RX 6700M highlighted in red. It seems to be in between the laptops with RTX 3060 graphics, so definitely not a bad result as the 3060 is great, but it's also not quite the 3070 tier AMD have been saying, at least in this one game. We'll check more. I'm going to compare the 6700M against the 3070 and 3060 in 17 games at 2 resolutions soon, so make sure you're subscribed for those upcoming comparisons. Red Dead Redemption 2 was tested with the game's benchmark, and this time the Delta 15 was more in line with those 3070 results, so it's clearly going to depend on the specific game. What was strange though was that the 6700M was actually 3 FPS ahead of the higher tier 6800M. Now, I did test the 6800M basically right at launch, so maybe driver updates would boost its score. I'm actually getting it again soon to compare with the 6700M, so I'll retest that once it arrives and update the result. I think it's more likely to be the case that the 6800M laptop had X16 memory while the 6700M machine has X8 memory. I'll be sure to use the same memory when doing the dedicated comparisons though, but this is still valid as this is how both laptops ship. Control was tested running through the same part of the game on all laptops, and the 6700M was now back with the 3060 laptops. Granted, this is an Nvidia sponsored title, so that's not super surprising. Of course, this game also has DLSS support, so that could be enabled on the 3060 laptops to significantly boost performance too. AMD has FSR, but it's not present in this game. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the game's benchmark, and this was another where the Delta 15's 6700M was back in line with the 3070 laptops. This also puts it ahead of the higher tier 6800M that I previously tested a few months ago. So yeah, definitely looks like I'm going to have to retest with the latest drivers and find out what the deal is, because it should be higher. Again, I'm guessing it's the memory, as this is another game I've found to be greatly affected by X8 and X16 memory. As mentioned earlier, it should be possible to get a speed boost in games by attaching an external screen to the Delta 15, as this will bypass the integrated graphics. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we're only looking at a small 2% increase, or 2 FPS. But hey, this is only a simple change, and at least it seems to show you're not missing out on much by sticking to the laptop screen. Results will of course vary by game. Generally, GPU-heavy games at high setting levels see small changes with an external screen, while high frame rate esports titles have a bigger change. I've just compared one game here because, as mentioned, I'll be comparing the Delta 15 in 17 different games at 2 different resolutions in many upcoming comparison videos. So again, make sure you're subscribed for those. Alright, now let's see how well MSI's Delta 15 performs in even more games at all setting levels. Let's start with Call of Duty Warzone, which was tested with either all settings at max or minimum as it doesn't have built-in presets. It was playing perfectly fine for me even maxed out. The difference was fairly small at minimum settings, so might as well enjoy the better visuals with higher settings. We compared Control earlier, but now I've also tested it with ray tracing enabled in the green bars. I'll save direct comparisons for the upcoming dedicated videos, but I am noticing that the ray tracing results are behind Nvidia's options. And yeah, no DLSS support for Radeon graphics, which is something that I usually test with this game. So I'd probably stay away from ray tracing in this game, but it's running fine with it off, even maxed out. Cyberpunk was also compared earlier, but with all setting presets now, I've also tested the ray tracing presets up the top. Again, no DLSS, and FSR isn't supported in this game, so I'd stay away from the ray tracing presets given the performance is significantly higher without it, with high settings getting us above 60 FPS. Microsoft Flight Simulator was able to pass 60 FPS with the high-end setting preset, though it was possible to pass 100 FPS with the low setting preset if you're after a smoother experience at the expense of visuals. Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a game that I've found to generally do well with Radeon graphics, and that's the case here. 70 FPS at max settings is a nice result for a gaming laptop, but again, this will be one of many games I compare in depth in a future video soon. Watch Dogs Legion was still above 60 FPS at max settings. Most of these AAA games don't necessarily need mega high FPS to enjoy, but I'd probably take the 20% boost to average FPS by lowering down to very high settings, as that still looks pretty good. Fortnite, on the other hand, is more of an esports title, and it was running above 100 FPS even at max settings, while medium or low settings might be a better matchup for the 240Hz screen if you're playing competitively. CSGO was also reaching super high frame rates, though the differences between the different setting presets was very small. This game generally sees big gains with a mux switch or external screen, but even without this, the frame rate is higher than the screen's refresh rate. Rainbow Six Siege was also hitting very high frame rates no problem. Low settings had 1% lows that were above the screen's 240Hz refresh rate, but even maxed out, 200 FPS is still going to be more than fine. I should also note that this game opened up on the integrated graphics by default. I'm not sure how they still haven't fixed this at the driver level, as this is a problem that's existed for years, but I had to manually set the game to run on the RX 6700M instead of the Vega GPU in the 5800H. I guess this is also a decent time for me to jump in and just say that I had no other driver issues with the 6700M. No games crashed and everything was perfectly stable. Red Dead Redemption 2 was compared earlier, and as we saw there, the Radeon GPU was doing quite well compared to others. Above 60 FPS at max settings is a great result for a laptop, and near 100 at high settings is closer to RTX 3070 performance. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was above 100 FPS at max settings, and similar deal for Battlefield 5. Still easily playable on this hardware at max settings, though these are essentially older gen games now. Going back even further, and The Witcher 3 was above 100 FPS maxed out even for the 1% low, and although it was running fine at Ultra, you can get a fairly big 35% boost to average FPS, lowering down just one level to high settings. The 6700M can also make use of AMD's new FSR in games that support it, but unfortunately none of these games that I regularly test have FSR support yet. I did consider adding some games that do support FSR to showcase it and see what it can do, but at the same time it felt a little weird and I guess biased for me to go out of my way and test games that I don't otherwise test. I think if FSR just isn't yet supported in these popular titles that I often test, then it's just bad luck. I really do hope that we see it in more of these games that I regularly test. I'll cover absolutely everything else about the Delta 15 like thermals, battery life, and more in the upcoming full review, so make sure you're subscribed for that upcoming content. And of course for all the upcoming 6700M comparisons. Otherwise for now, come and join me in the community in Discord and get behind the scenes videos by supporting the channel on Patreon, and come and check out some of my other videos over here next. I'll see you in one of those.